Jai Shri Radhe. Continuing with the stories of the 252 Vaishnav disciples of Sri Gosaiji in English. Today is Varta 145 on day 163. The story of one renunciate from Gujarat, Bhav Prakash. He is a devotee of Sattvic disposition. In the eternal Leela, his name is Penchu Gop. In the eternal Leela, there are many, many animals and birds. All of them have their own very varied form and mood, but they are all manifested as parts of the divine Leela. Within this frame, Penchu is a hen. In the early morning, she would come to Sri Nanda's palace and wake the Lord with her very soft and sweet voice. Sri Tyagi was always very pleased with him. Part 1. Once a group of Vaishnavas came from Gujarat to Gokul in order to have the sight of Sri Gosaiji. This renunciate was in the group, and he also saw Sri Gosaiji, whereby he felt very happy, and he requested Sri Gosaiji to initiate him with the Lord's name, and Sri Gosaiji did so. Afterwards, Sri Gosaiji blessed him by granting him Brahma Sambandh initiation. The renunciate then supplicated Sri Gosaiji, "O Maharaj, where do my duties now lie?" Sri Gosaiji instructed him to constantly chant the Lord's name in his heart of hearts. By doing so, your love for the Lord and your dedication to him will be perfected. From that day onwards, the renunciate Vaishnava chanted the Lord's name constantly. After some days, through the grace of Sri Gosaiji, he began to experience great love for the Lord. He would go to have the holy sight of Sri Navneet Priyaji and Sri Gosaiji. He spent his life in this way. Some days later, the renunciate asked Sri Gosaiji for permission to go to have the holy sight of Sri Govardhanaji, and he went. Having done that, he set off on a tour of Vraja. On the way, he came to Gokul. After this, he spent his life wandering around the holy places of Vraja. He did not set up his own place to live, but stayed in the most exalted places, where the finest divine discourses were held, and where the most accomplished Vaishnavas lived. He kept their association, then he began to tour all over India. In this way, the renunciate one day entered a certain village where a snake had bitten the son of one Vaishnava and died. The mother was wailing loudly. Hearing this, the renunciate, who was nearby with some other accomplished Vaishnavas, asked why she was crying in this way. Some bystanders told him what had happened. The renunciate Vaishnava felt very sorry for the mother, approached the boy and spoke the Lord's name into his ear. The boy was revived. After this, everyone began to bother the renunciate. "Please teach us this amazing knowledge you have." The renunciate Vaishnava replied, "Of course I can teach you, but you will not believe me." They said, "Yes, we will believe you. After all, we have seen the effect before our very eyes." The renunciate Vaishnava said, "Okay, I will teach you the mantra, Shri Krishna Sharanam Mama, which you should recite all the time." The other Vaishnavas said, "Oh yes, we know this mantra. Why don't you use some other mantra?" The renunciate Vaishnavas retorted, "This mantra is supreme." Thereafter, the renunciate continually pilgrimaged around Vraj for the rest of his days. He then gave up his mortal coils and attained the lotus feet of Sri Govardhanaji. The moral of this story is that the Vaishnavas should constantly repeat the 8-syllable mantra with the firmest faith. Thereby, all actions are perfected. Lack of faith is a huge obstruction. Sri Vallabhacharya has written in his Vivekadarya Ashray treatise, Avishwasana Kartavya Sarota Vadakastu Saha. So non-belief should never be allowed to occur, as it is a great hindrance to devotion. Lack of faith is a demonic trait and is an obstacle to devotion and should never be allowed to affect a Vaishnava. It should never be allowed to affect a Vaishnava. Thus concludes Varta 145, the story of the renunciate Vaishnava who was the recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and an accomplished Vaishnava. There is no end to his tale. Continuing now with Varta 146, the story of a Baba from Gujarat, Bhav Prakash. This is a devotee of Tamasi disposition. In eternal Leela, his name is Ananya, who is a form of the divine loving sentiment of a hen. She would serve the beloveds in their forest boughs and would especially tend to the trees in the early mornings. Once she woke up in the middle of the night and thought it was the morning. She began to tend to the trees. She caused some noise which Sri Tyagi heard, and he got up, thinking that morning had broken. Lalitaji did tell him that it was still the middle of the night, but Sri Swaminiji was angered and cursed Ananya to fall to the material world because she had caused her grief through untimely separation from her beloved. She was born as a Baba to a family in Gujarat. He was 25 when his parents died. He had never married and made his living as a Baba. Part 1. Once Sri Gosaiji was in Gujarat in order to have the holy sight of Sri Ranchoralalji. This Baba once tended to Sri Gosaiji's hair in a very pleasing way. Sri Gosaiji was very happy with him. The Baba had the vision of Sri Gosaiji as the Supreme Lord himself and immediately supplicated Sri Gosaiji to accept him as a disciple. Sri Gosaiji initiated him with the Lord's name. Soon the Baba developed into a very accomplished Vaishnava. After having tended to Sri Gosaiji, he never tended to anyone else's hair or nails ever again. The Vaishnavas asked him, "Why do you not cut anyone else's hair or nails?" He replied, "After cutting Sri Gosaiji's nails, how can I ever cut anyone else's?" He threw all his hairdressing tools into a well and took up another profession. Sri Gosaiji then went to have the holy sight of Sri Ranchoralalji, and on his way back, Sri Gosaiji again visited that Baba's village. The Baba donated everything he had to his guru. Sri Gosaiji returned to Gokul while the Baba stayed in his village. The Baba spoke of nothing but his guru and the beloved Lord for as long as he lived. He unceasingly chanted the eight-syllable mantra of surrender whilst contemplating Sri Gosaiji's form. It was not much longer until he left his body and entered the eternal Leela. Bhav Prakash. The moral of this story is that exclusive devotion is the greatest asset of a Vaishnava. From such one-pointed devotion, Nirodha, or reciprocal love between the devotee and the Lord, is perfected. Thus concludes Varta 146, the story of the Baba, who was the recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and an accomplished Vaishnava. There is really no end to his tale. Continuing further with Varta 147, the story of the son of a Pathan who lived in Delhi, Bhav Prakash. This is a devotee of Rajasi disposition. In the eternal Leela, his name is Rasogop. He would accompany Sri Nandaraiji whilst wearing a sword. He is a form of the divine loving sentiment of a hen. He was born into the family of a Pathan in Delhi. When he was 20 years old, he happened to meet a Vaishnava who told him, "You are a divine soul, I know this. You should become a Vaishnava and thereby fulfill your life's purpose." The Pathan's son asked, "How do I know that you are telling the truth?" The Vaishnava was able to recount to him everything about his childhood. The Pathan's son realized that the Vaishnava was an accomplished and great being, and that he should do as he said, realizing that it would be in his best interest. The Pathan's son inquired, "How might I become a Vaishnava?" The Vaishnava told him, "Sri Gosaiji is on the Nigambod Ghat at the moment. Go to him and be initiated with the Lord's name. Then you will be regarded as a Vaishnava." The Pathan's son took the firm resolve to go to Sri Gosaiji and become his disciple. Part 1. The Pathan's son came to Sri Gosaiji in order to be initiated with the Lord's name. Sri Gosaiji granted his request and he became a Vaishnava. His father went to the Emperor Sersa and complained to him that his son had adopted the Hindu faith. The Emperor called the Pathan's son and told him, "You must give up this faith." The Pathan's son replied, "Why should I give up this path which I truly love? One should never renounce the object of one's love. The Emperor caught sight of his tulsi kantis and his tilak and asked him what they were all about. The Pathan's son replied that these were very dear to him. The Emperor retorted, "Will you not give them up?" The Pathan's son said, "I will never give them up." The Emperor called out, "Is anyone there? Bring me my sword. I am going to kill him." Everyone realized that he was going to kill the Pathan's son. Then the Pathan's son took out his own sword and placed it into the Emperor's hand, who then said to him, "You have much love for this path, and I'm very angry with you for this. Let's see if your God or anyone will protect you." The Pathan's son spoke to the Emperor, "Please do whatever you feel you have to do. I will not change my mind." When the Emperor saw that Pathan's son was to his beliefs, how true the Pathan's son was to his beliefs, he became very pleased with him, and he presented him with a gown of honour and sent him home. Some time after this, one Vaishnava told Sri Gosaiji the whole story. Sri Gosaiji said, "This is a true way for a Vaishnava. Their righteous path they never reveal and keep it in their own heart." The Pathan's son was ready to give up his life, but he would not be forced to give up his faith. This is how a Vaishnava should ideally be. A Vaishnava should take solid shelter in their beloved. When you have firm faith and love for Sri Govardhanaji, then why would he not protect and nourish you? Vaishnavas should have total belief in him. They should know that he will act according to his very own wish. They should therefore never have any anxiety. This was Sri Gosaiji's stern advice. The Vaishnavas felt very happy when they heard it. The moral of this story is that when a Vaishnava fearlessly grasps and puts everything into their righteous path, then the beloved Lord will most certainly help them. Thus concludes Varta 147, the story of the Pathan's son from Delhi, who was a recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and an accomplished Vaishnava. There is really no end to his tale. Aaj ke Anand ki jai ho, apar Anand ki jai ho, sab Vaishnavan ko sadar, sadenya, saprem. Jai Shri Krishna. Jai Jai Shri Radhe.